Hi, and welcome to Closer Look. I'm your host, Mike Coulter. Now, normally I might have a background and something and be sitting in the studio, but considering today's topic, I thought I would make it look like it's another Zoom call. Let me tell you, we've all had plenty of Zoom calls in the last couple of years here at Parkland College, Zoom and Teams and whatever online communication thing we're having to be using that day. But today we're going to take a closer look at how Parkland's response to COVID and how we handled certain things, and just kind of look at the timeline and what was happening and what was going on in everyone's head at that time. Today's guests are Vice President of Student Services Mike Tramey and Dean of Students Marietta Turner. So Amanda, Avery, and I sat down and we just asked them questions for about an hour about all kinds of range of topics involving COVID. And it's very interesting, so stick around. We'll be right back.
I think it was probably even into 20 for me. I remember right after the holidays, a news story, something going on in China related to COVID, and we started hearing maybe January, right after we came back from the break, that there was an outbreak of something over there. So that was the first time I remember hearing about it.
Yeah, for me, I remember paying attention to an article and then reading something else, and then someone started talking about what the WHO had to say about it. And I was like, oh, this might be more serious than I thought.
We get these kind of, or we've had historically these types of outbreaks of one thing or another, whether it was swine flu, bird flu. We've had even Ebola when it first ramped up. That had some impact to Parkland, but it was slow going. You heard about it internationally first, but it wasn't something that we took on that information real fast. It seemed like, okay, this was impacting China at the point in time. You know, maybe there would be some impact, especially with U of I students coming back after Christmas break from that area of the world. But I don't remember it ramping up, and it got really. I remember then all of a sudden around the 1st of March, it really started ramping fast. And so it seems slower to me January and February, but then March all of a sudden was like a whirlwind.
Yeah. It was more or less you start hearing about stories of more cases in New York, and then the first cases in Chicago, and you're like, oh, it's coming. But then March hit, and it just kind of took off exponentially.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to think about it because it progressed so far in a 2-year period of time that going back to the beginning almost seems surreal to go back to that point in time. But yeah, there was not only no testing, but there was a lack of even an understanding of what it was, how it was transmitted, to what level it was transmitted, what the college campus impact would be. So even after we went out in March of 20, there was still all that information gathering going on. So we were sitting with different community groups trying to process and parcel what it even was or meant at that point in time, even after after we went out of school. And so it really, there was a complete lack of information to the extent we had information later at that beginning stages. We were really in an information void, I felt like, early on.
That was the big part, was you weren't really getting a lot of information. It was very piecemeal, and it was more about them beginning to look at the demographics of where it was ramping up, and they hadn't really put into place any protocols yet.
And the news stories at that time really focused, in my memory serves right, really focused on a lot of tragic and horrific situations around some deaths and things in certain populations. So it was about the effect of the virus, but not really much about transmission and understanding and that. So it was the end results and that kind of, because that's all anyone could see at that point. It really wasn't a scientific proliferation of information the way we had it, say, a year later when testing had been developed and vaccines were in process and those kinds of things. So I think back to those early days and all the things we didn't know. Every March, we have a state chief student services officers meeting, and we happen to be in Bloomington that Friday before. And I'm over there with Chief Colebrook. Chief Colebrook was presenting to the statewide group of us on some things related to Clery, the Clery Act and some things. So he and I had driven over together, and I get an urgent message from Dr. Ramage to leave the meeting and come back to campus. That he was calling an emergency cabinet meeting of the VP group in about an hour. And so I had an hour to get back to campus. So Bill and I drove back at pretty good rate to get back here on time because the state had given him information through the ICCB that this was likely to be something that the colleges were going to go out with. And so I had about an hour to think about it on the way back to campus, and it was funny because at that meeting, all of us subordinates to presidents were getting the same text message. So mine went first, and then they started lighting up around the table, and so those messages started coming to everybody else. I'm guessing they were going to be called back to their campus too, but we left so fast that I was the first one out the door. But I think, like I said, we could see the phones lighting up as we went that, hey, I got to get back to campus, and I think they were doing the same. And we grabbed our teams and got back and started that conversation of what that was going to mean. So we were going into spring break week, so we had a little bit of time bought from that side of things, but there had to be that was priority number one. It was working with Pam and Nancy at the time to think through how were we academically going to get through the rest of the semester. Because originally when we went out, it was thought we would be out for 2 weeks. So it was that this would be a 2-week thing. How are we going to get through these 2 weeks? We have a week of instruction coming back out of spring break that we were going to have to get through, which was going to push us way over our allotted number of snow days or out days with the state. But what was that going to mean? Were we going to push graduation back a week? Were we going to reset the end of the semester? So we were considering things like that, but it was all about the academics at that point. How are we going to finish the semester was first thought number one, to be honest. So those were the crux of the conversations. And then Marietta and her group about how we were going to message students and think through that. I mean, that's what I remember. What do you?
That was the main thing. Everybody was like, okay, for these 2 weeks, well, the students are already on break, we're coming back. What do we do to put them online? How do we get the messages to them to make sure they understand, that they're not to come to campus, that we will be shut down for an additional time period? But it was primarily how are we going to move all these classes online for these 2 weeks, coming back. We really hadn't even thought past that. So nobody was even thinking of everyone needs a laptop. Nobody, because we only thought it was going to be 2 weeks.
Yeah, it was how are we just going to get through this little surge and little bubble and get to the end of the semester? What could we do to get the instruction of the spring 20 semester complete? Yeah. We were starting to figure out over spring break and what we would message and then get into that. We decided that we were going to break one more week to give us time to figure out how we could really go to online learning. I mean, the incredible fortitude of the faculty to pivot the way they did was certainly not without bumps and bruises early, because there was no Teams technology, there was no real Zoom elements in a lot of classes, and so it was originally about those kinds of things, about how could we help the faculty pivot and get into that. And we decided to go and call, if my memory serves, we decided to call that extra week after spring break and extend it one more week to get through that 2-week major bubble of time, and then give our faculty time to figure out how to transition education. And then we get into the other issue, which happened simultaneously, which is the computer outage that we had. And so then those two things are playing on one another in a short period of time. So you had a confluence of pieces. I tell you, it was the greatest, that period of about 2 months was the greatest example of collaborative and collective leadership I've ever been a part of in my career. I mean,
was
by the
amazing.
day, just an immense amount of decisions and thought process that had to be weighed and made in what was unknown contexts and unknown scenarios was, I mean, I marvel at my colleagues every day through that period of time. I mean, Marietta and the VP group and the president, just incredible fortitude and leadership displayed during that time by those folks.
I think the collaboration, everybody was willing to do whatever they had to do. I mean, you've had faculty who've never been an online instructor who literally like, tell me what I have to do to put
Yeah.
my entire class online. Everyone was willing to just dig deep and make it happen so that we can ensure our students' academic success. And that was just marvelous to see. And the commitment to getting laptops to students and to faculty. I mean, people were willing to come in and just put in their time to try to help get people whatever equipment they needed, whatever support they needed to make sure that their content was up and students could access it. It was just impressive to see that much student-focused energy put out
Yeah.
by the whole campus.
Yeah, I mean, I'll always remember some of the nuanced pieces, but that's my lasting memory of that piece is that collaborative and collective effort. I mean, it was an all hands on deck in
was.
any way, shape, and form to make student education happen.
Yeah.
We were doing anything we can. The funding side, Chris Randalls is a financial genius, and he was helping us get to every nook and cranny of funding we could to find computer technology. But that was a question that was evolving by the day. It was, what laptops can we find and pull together, and what computers can people take home from their houses? What can we send home, and what processes? So Campus Tech had an incredible volume of work to do in that period of time too. I'd be remiss if I left
Oh my
them out.
gosh, yes.
And
Thank
the
you
work
so
that they did
much.
in that piece too, and just trying to get us all with options to work from home so we could keep those pieces moving. And we were tearing at that point. A lot of people still had towers instead of desktops and hardwired monitors. So they were tearing monitors off, and we were sending them home with laptops that had bigger screens to work from. And I mean, just an immense amount of tracking and support that had to go along with that. And then finding students technical solutions. We were quickly trying to figure out, it wasn't right away, but it was soon after, how to add Wi-Fi capabilities to poles in the parking lot so people could drive up in cars and park outside in the parking lot and get Wi-Fi access, because you didn't want them next to somebody else, but they could sit in their cars. And a lot of our students depended upon Wi-Fi at jobs or restaurants or things to be able to do their work, and now they have no access to that internet. So even if we could get stuff online, and when we could get stuff online, the internet access for students was a big piece of that. We rated and bought as many MiFi devices as we could, and the campus was loaning those out. So it was just one technological component domino after another that we'd run into a problem, and then they'd set out and fixing that problem, and we'd find another problem, and then it was set out to fix that one, is what I think I remember technologically about that time.
Yeah, and everyone would immediately say, okay, how can we solve this? I remember everyone would think about, IT was just fantastic. They would, you'd say, I need us to be able to do this, can you help? We had to take our orientation, and we literally told people, make us a video at home, we're gonna put it up there, because we need to make sure students can complete orientation. We don't need any barriers. We can't have anybody come to campus. And we literally, everyone went home, made videos, and marketing and IT they got it up there for us so that we could continue to complete the process for our new and mid students.
And I'll congratulate or talk about the thanks I have, appreciation for my student services team. I mean, they were in a tough spot of having to help students finish one semester and then continue to try to build enrollment for the next semester, all in a situation that is not conducive to enrollment in any way, shape, or form. And so the yeoman's work that everybody from Marietta's area and Dean Christensen Migelski's area, and then what was then to become Dean DeVingman's area. I mean, the work that they put in trying to work two separate processes and problems at the same time was incredible as well. And so it truly was an all hands on deck kind of approach.
Yeah.
So, and then at that point we're just trying to figure out too, then we had to try to figure out how to get through the computer outage.
Yeah.
And so then I sat here, I remember in the cafeteria and helped a means team. I would schedule departments to come back and pick up laptops or pick up items so that they could build the security software in, get that done, and then get them safe to get out into students and faculty and staff's hands. But you couldn't be by anybody because COVID's raging at the same time. So all the things you needed to do, you had these competing dilemmas or problems, whatever you want to call them now. I prefer not to call them
Yeah, meeting
more
people out
serious
on the
terms.
patio
Yeah.
to handle something, or telling students to drive through the drive-through or hand it to you. It's like, you know, it's like you're going to get McDonald's. We were handing out laptops.
It's interesting. This interview makes me think of those things I'd kind of forgotten over time. So thank you for asking that question.
That's the point.
Yeah, they were big for a while. I mean, the thing that was different for all of us, for the first time, there was no separation between work and home. And so, I mean, we were literally on Teams chats with the leadership group until after midnight and before 6 a.m. And hours were running almost continuously because there was no separation. You were working through lunch, you were working through dinner, you were working through, I mean, the problems, we hadn't developed a sense of how to separate those things yet. And there was such a crisis of amount of things to deal with that it didn't seem fair to not deal with those things in the moment. So there was no work-life balance.
No.
It was work
It was just
almost every minute that wasn't sleep at that point in time.
Yeah. You felt guilty if you turned
Yeah.
off. And at this time, remember, we're still trying to get things up and running. And then it's like, oh, yeah, now you have to learn Teams. I'm like, what's that? But we had to find new ways to be able to communicate and meet and process and get things up and running.
And
so
managers
it was
figuring
managers
out,
were trying to figure out how to get their teams together and keep them motivated and keep things going. Then we had to get the call center going to
Yeah.
help students, you know, deal with the fact that they couldn't talk to people face to face. So it was a lot of
Yeah, I mean, so much that
pieces.
happened that spring, and so really that spring ended up being all remote. If memory serves, we really didn't bring any instruction back. Those students in hands-on classes were all given incompletes to finish up as they were able in the later summer, once it was safe, a little bit safer to come back, and we had a better understanding of some testing and that kind of stuff. Especially health professions, you know, the amount of clinical opportunities, you know, the hospitals and the medical facilities are overrun, so they didn't want our clinical students in for a little bit of time until they figured that out. So really that kind of ran through that first spring and into summer. And then it was in the fall where it changes a little bit, and we tried to bring some folks back in the fall of 20. You know, a few classes back onto campus, a few hands-on, more CTE spaces, and that's when we had to shift. We really started building structures we had never built before. Right. So Dean Turner and Tracy build the COVID response team, and we get that up and running. That was a major milestone, I think, in the progression of things, because now that we were bringing some people back onto campus, we had cases that would happen on campus, and the public health contact tracing was overwhelmed, and so U of I and us both set up our own contact tracing bodies. And the amount of work, when you talk about workload, that they spent on that process and just churning case after case. There were times where we had triple digits in cases running at the same time that we were contact tracing. So hundreds of cases and taking entire class sections out. And I mean, how many health professions calls did we do? We were trying to figure out, okay, did we wipe out all of dental hygiene today, or did we wipe out all of vet tech today, or all of tractor trailer? I mean, it was just call after call, working into the evening for their teams and shops. And so
and the weekend.
These two did such an incredible job. I don't know how the institution survives without their work.
Yeah, it was very serious at that time in terms of the amount of cases. So our team also worked on weekends. So we would work
Yeah.
Friday evening and we just say, okay, we cut it off. Everybody go home, sleep, rest, and then we'd start again
Yeah.
on Sunday afternoon. But sometimes we'd have a breakthrough issue and it would take out a team and their roommates. So we'd have to work and add in hours. So
Child Development Center
Oh,
case
Child
would pop up,
Development
and now we're talking
Center,
about
yeah.
itty bitties we had to
Yeah,
deal with.
So it was a
and-
lot of juggling at that time. A lot of people putting in long hours.
I struggled with it to the point where I was one of the first to come back on a more regular basis because I don't function well that way. I need to be here, I need to be in that environment. I mean, I was lucky my kids were older, but I had 2 kids at home that were trying to navigate school and all their meetings, a wife that's working from home in a similar higher ed type of job, and so I struggled with it immensely. It was hard because you never put it away. I didn't sleep. I didn't, eating was a challenge at that point. The loneliness, I guess, that a lot of people described, I would admit that I felt.
I got tired of talking to my cat.
Especially your cat.
Yeah, he's very talkative, and people would hear him. He'd have things to say like, "You've been on that screen too long." And I live alone. My son had just moved out right before all this hit, so I was totally alone. And I was like, I need people. And I really, I mean, I would get up and go and walk all the way down past the Y to try to just get out and wave at people, because I miss seeing people, and I'm a people person. I'm one of those who would pick up a phone or walk to someone's office to talk to them.
Yeah.
And to sit and talk on a screen, and a lot of times people would put their picture up. I was like, oh my God, I can't wait to get back to campus. And then when we got back, you still did not see students near each other. You couldn't get students
It was
to
a
sit at a table.
surreal
It was very surreal.
Campus. Yeah, I mean, and employees too. One of the things I think makes Parkland so strong is the atmosphere that its employees have with one another. And you came back and that was just gone, and it didn't feel like Parkland. It didn't feel like what we're used to, and that took a long time to get through, because even though we came back that fall, there was still such heavy restriction and mask guidance and that people pretty much stayed in their office. They didn't eat together, they didn't meet together, they didn't socialize. There was just this really strange feeling on campus.
It was and one of the reasons why we tried to do a civility initiative to welcome people back with the smiles on the mask was we were all, we can't greet each other and do smiles and open the door. So I said, let's get masks and greet each other, because this is hard on our faculty and staff as well as the students. And that's just it. It was surreal in terms of it impacted the vibe and the general energy on this campus. This is a very friendly, open kind of an environment, and to see everyone still keeping far away from each other and not meeting in person
was
still.
tough.
It was very tough.
I didn't feel like, I still don't feel like we've completely recovered from it, but this fall, it finally felt somewhat back to normal, is how I would describe that. I mean, even all throughout fall of 21 and spring of 22, we go back to the governor's executive order, and that happens, and so there's that hanging over the campus, and you still had people with a general caution and concern in their routines. And I for the first time this fall, I think we all have remarked at different times about it finally feels normal again on campus, and probably not fully back, but it's a whole lot closer than we've had it in a long time.
I think one of the turning points for me was, I remember when we first came back, the first few months, you still only saw small gatherings of students at tables talking and studying together. And one of the things I commented on at the beginning of the semester was, look at all the tables together. Look at all the people hanging out studying. Look at the fishbowl, they're hanging out. Look at the cafeteria at 11 and 12. We had cafeteria karaoke yesterday, and we went over a half an hour because there were so many people that hung out to still sing. It was great to see that much energy with the students. We're handing out boxes of popcorn. It felt normal, and that to me has been the telling part, is seeing more people having in-person meetings and then seeing the students willing to come out and have fun and engage.
I think part of that difficult atmosphere was brought on by the circumstance, again, a knowledge piece. So early on, when we started to think about coming back, the guidance from both the CDC and the state was to, tape up every water fountain, remove the lounge furniture so people couldn't congregate. So we put that into places, or we taped it off, and it just had an atmosphere on campus that wasn't very welcoming, and that's kind of the antithesis of Parkland. It's just not what we've always been about, and so that was a struggle too for, I think, a lot of folks mentally, to see something that they take such pride in look so different.
Yeah.
I mean, we had, I think, one fall was 15 or 19. I try to put that number out of my head these days, but a double-digit enrollment decline. We have been seeing some enrollment declines for a considerable period of time, since 2010, that are obviously unrelated to the pandemic, as it pertains to demographic shifts in the state. So we're already battling that, and then you add this pandemic, and you had students coming out of the K-12 systems where they really struggled with the online education piece. So their experience of education in a pandemic world was completely negative to them. So trying to entice them to come out of high school and that negative experience and give us a chance was almost an impossible sell. And so you had their experience was negative in a lot of ways from the K-12 setting. They didn't like it. They stayed away. You had our students, especially those that were hands-on students, who we had to do things very different, for a while, and they didn't get to have the same experience turning wrenches or developing in simulation labs and those kinds of things. So they stayed away because they couldn't do what education felt like to them. And then you had a significant amount of our students who dealt in some way personally with the pandemic, whether it's they themselves were immunocompromised and had to be very careful, or family members were in a situation that they couldn't afford to bring it home, or they're the caregiver in the house, and they needed the income, and so they couldn't risk bringing a virus home to the household. And so you had all of those things working against enrollment. So it went in the tank for a while, and it really took a considerable messaging effort from marketing and Stephanie Stewart's team and Dean Smigelski's team to try to battle that in any way they could. And the main way we were able to try to battle it was financially, to make it really easy for students to come back. You had the CARES, federal injection of CARES funds in all three phases, that allowed us to put money in student hands, which was really the only saving grace we had at the time to try to salvage some sort of enrollment, to not let it slide any further than it already did. So that was tough.
That was a very tough time, and a lot of students lost their source of income and lost jobs. Many of them were head of household, and many of them were struggling to try and maintain in school. Our faculty did great work in trying to be supportive and engaging with students to try and keep them in classes and giving them extension. But there were some students where, excuse me, they were overwhelmed because they got sick, and then their family member got sick, and it just became a vicious cycle.
Yeah,
and they would give
every
up.
barrier that our faculty or our staff could tear down, it seemed like life threw up 3 or 4 more barriers in front of our students. And
Yeah, it
so
was rough.
while everyone here did an incredible job and the best they could, it was just life was hitting us with more things faster than what we could take barriers away for students. Kudos to our campus tech department. They laid their hands on so many laptops and so many devices for our students that I don't know that ever really felt that bad. I'm sure it was bad, and they were behind the scenes scrambling to no end, but our campus tech department did an amazing job through that pandemic. I can't give
They
them
were
enough
fantastic.
praise.
I can't give them enough kudos. They were absolutely amazing.
And that really was the leadership of Dr. Lau and Dr. Sutton. Their leadership to work with their academic deans and department chairs to say, okay, we have a problem, no ideas off the table, how are we going to solve it? And to work, to really work with the faculty to encourage, as much flexibility, as Marietta said, for students. That leadership made an incredible difference to our students still being successful. That first virtual graduation, while it felt awful, I think, to Marietta and I,
Yeah.
is a testament really to the work of
the
those
work,
academic
yeah.
folks in academic services, all the way from leadership down to the faculty member, to make that happen. Because I, in some ways, thinking back, I don't know how they did it, but God bless them for doing it, because it made a huge difference to our students.
They really did. They took the time to, as mitigations were put in place, to actually structure classrooms so they could ensure that students had the appropriate distancing. They made sure many times that they would give them options in terms of, if you're not feeling well, you can dial in. They were just stupendous in their willingness to support students in their academic goals. And many times faculty was asking, what do you want me to do here? And they did. They varied the times the students came. They offered all types of support systems, and I've never seen people pivot so quickly. The faculty and the IT, both of them, I've put them on giant pedestals for life, because they were so incredible.
You know, another group you made me think about that we haven't mentioned that played an integral part in this too was the physical plant. So as Dean Sutton, or as it was Dean Sutton at the start, but Vice President Sutton and Vice President Lau kind of led that group to think outside the box. One of the ways that they did things was try to, as Marietta said, space out the classrooms. That took an incredible amount of work from our physical plant to put marks on the floor in every classroom of where desks could be that maintain the appropriate distance as mandated by CDC and ICC and IDPH at the time. And they would go through, they bought new cleaning tools that they had never used before, and some ionizers and that kind of thing that were helping us try to clean classrooms and spaces at night. They got PPE secured for us, so brought in masks, and so we hadn't talked about the physical plant, but as we're talking through, the incredible job that they did in this can't be understated either.
No, can't. I mean, they helped us be able to bring athletics in, because we had to adhere by the NJCAA's guidelines as we developed protocols, and our AD, Brendan McHale, did a great job writing up his protocols so that we could initiate games, and he worked diligently with physical plant to make sure that all of the spaces were cleaned appropriately so that teams could come in and play and practice and play. And we would not have been able to keep the seasons going if it hadn't been for physical plant's work.
That's a great point. Yeah. You have a break point, and so we come back with some partial back in fall of 20, and so we're back. We feel like we're turning the corner on the pandemic. We get to spring of 20, and things look like they're going okay. I remember we get to late spring, and we were actually talking about, okay, is this thing over? You know, are we going to be able to get back in fall of 21 to where we wanted to be? And all of a sudden, and I can't remember the exact time frame, but the first set of variants start to hit, and then the rates that were trending in the right direction take an about face and go horribly bad again. And that's when things start going where the governor starts talking about, do I need to take measures of more drastic executive orders? And so we started that summer hearing the grumblings about what might be coming from a state level, but everything we had heard was that they weren't going to do too much with higher ed. They were really going to focus on the K-12 settings with some measures of what we were here in the summer. So all of a sudden we get to August 27th, and I'll never forget that day. So I'm defending my dissertation that day, and the governor comes out with his executive order, and the advanced draft of what we had seen had K-12 in it, did not have higher ed in it. And he starts talking and gives his speech, and we all tuned in to kind of hear what he was saying, and he drops higher ed into the speech. And he said, this order now will go over higher ed as well. And I just remember the jaw about hitting the table of, oh no, we've got to pivot again.
One more time, yes.
And so that was kind of a crazy day. Like I said, it was the 21, the 20 fall of 20 and 21 school year was just kind of gradually getting back. It felt weird because we had all those mitigations, but people were kind of getting used to it. The rates were improving a little bit in the spring semester. So I think you went to this hope, and then that hope got quickly dashed by the pandemic as it about faced. And that I remember as a distinct kind of focal point or turning point in our work. And that kind of started the long gauntlet. That to me was when hope kind of went out. I thought, okay, 1 year we were going to be done with this thing, and that's when year 2 reared its ugly head.
Yeah, I think that those mitigations, we kept thinking, all right, we're back, it's just K-12, we're going to be okay, they're going to leave higher ed alone. And then once we realized, oh, we're included, and now we've got to do all these additional mitigations, that's when we realized this is going to go on for a while. We're really in it for the long haul. And I think it did kind of deflate everybody's not their sanity, but their hope. Everybody was feeling very hopeful that we've turned the corner, we've made it through, and then all of a sudden we realized, no, it's not over yet.
Yeah, I think that what got us through that point, though, was the strength of what we went through in the April and May of 20. And so we drew on those lessons learned and went back to the drawing board. Again, now we're having to build a structure we had never built before. We had to build the door checker system, and we had to get an app that could run with testing up and running. And while U of I had done that across town, nobody else had pulled it off like they had. And certainly at the community college level, nobody had the extensive system that was now being called for by the governor. So we spent the first week after that in legal calls with lawyers trying to interpret the executive order and trying to figure out the difference between what we absolutely had to do by the letter of the law, what we needed to do because it was the right thing to do in our contextual circumstance, and then what we may have wanted to do but didn't have a way to do. Or didn't have an option to do. You know, we're very fortunate that we lived in a town with two entities, the U of I, who made testing available through the SHIELD program to us even before they started the full SHIELD Illinois program, along with their partner OSF in that testing side, and then their app developers and that with OSF that started the SHIELD Illinois app and allowed us to tie into that thing. We were way ahead of our peer community colleges because we had access to those two resources. So while they're scrambling to get apps from private firms and that kind of thing, our ability to latch on to the technology and the resources of those two incredible partners from across town really made the difference for us. And then we had to set out in building another team. So Tracy Klaparski in our student life that had been running the COVID response team for so long, we kind of looked at what work that she and that team had been doing, and now we were subject to collecting vaccine status for the first time. And we hadn't done that before, but under the executive order, it was the only way for us to run it. And so we had to build a COVID vax team. So we set out we're already shrinking in manpower. We're having to supply these other teams. Now we've got to go to the employees one more time with a big ask of, I need bodies to run and log vaccine amounts because we don't have a McKinley as they do across town. And to the credit of the campus staff, one more time, they came out with smiles on their faces and a willingness to drop everything to make the crisis of the day go away. And this campus, the employees of this campus are nothing short of extraordinary.
They are. They're very committed and so willing to give of their time and energy when you say, help, can you help us with this emergency?
So we built a vax team and a COVID help desk and a door checker system in about 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, I think. And that was crazy time. We were working insane hours during that. I was leaving after midnight and coming back at about 6 a.m. or I was leaving the house by 4:30 in some cases to get back here for the 5 a.m. openings.
And then living in the help desk while you were
Yeah.
building it and trying to get more help to
So-
support it.
So that's a phase of the institution I'll never forget is the help desk phase. So as we get to that, I don't know if we fast forwarded too much for you, but that was a huge turning point. That September and October that was an incredible time. We had Tracy's team running at full bore. We had the VAX team running at full bore. Marietta and I trying to keep all those shops supplied with enough bodies to do the work that they needed to do, as well as now building the help desk and the door checker team. That stretched the institution pretty much to the max.
Yeah, we were juggling
Yeah.
people and juggling ourselves. I'm over here, will we be over here?
We hired annuitants to come back and staff that help
Yep.
desk, and so not only was it the current Parkland employees that did such a fantastic job, we had retirees step up and say, when Parkland
Wow.
needs us, we'll come back. And so that says a
Yeah,
lot.
It says a lot, definitely.
There certainly was pressure. There were a lot of folks arguing that we should have gone that route. We just didn't have the ability. OSF gave us everything they could give us. When we asked them to start the testing center here, they were giving us resources that, bless their hearts, they were struggling to amass for anybody else. And because we were the early partner and really working so closely with them, they gave us everything they could, and it took everything they had to meet the once-a-week testing requirement, and get us in for that. The thought that we could go to 2 or 3 every other day, like U of I did at times, we just didn't have the resources. We would have overwhelmed the community testing at that point, and that was a hard conversation because we're also a community partner, and if we draw that much resource off of community testing, what are we doing to the rest of the community too? And we did what we thought was the best decision. I know not everybody agreed with it, but it was really diligent, heartfelt thinking of the president and the vice president to go to where we landed. And that was where we felt we could be and what we could do. And it was kind of, where is the sweet spot to keep our students as safe as possible, but not overwhelm either the institution, our students, or the rest of the community. And a lot of our students, we had to keep in mind, don't come to campus but once a week, or didn't come to, they were on, and sort of try to regulate 2 or 3 time a week testing for our students wouldn't have made sense for our.
No.
We're different than the U of I. We're not residential like they were, and so we had to take some deviations that some people weren't happy with, but it kind of is what it is.
Yeah, we had to work with our population is a different set of demographics, and we don't have a McKinley, and we don't have what I call the layers of resources that U of I have, and we are tied to the community, and so we have to work with what we have and do the best we can. And I think that many kudos go to our senior leadership for their depth of working with the community partners to make it as safe as possible for our students and the staff to be able to work and go to school.
Yeah, we haven't detailed. I should probably shed some light behind that curtain a little bit too, but the amount of work that they did. So we had a countywide emergency operations center was set up almost immediately by Julie Pride and the public health department. Myself and Chief Colbrick sat in on that call every. At one point, we were meeting almost daily early on in the pandemic, but it got to be twice to once a week. Then, as things progressed, the communications arm of that operations center set up almost as frequent meetings as they're trying to get information out to the community. Stephanie Stewart and her team participated in that on a regular basis. Dr. Ramage was sitting in on some larger calls in both the state level and the community level with some folks around the mayor's offices and things that weren't running through EOC. You had the CAOs doing kind of regular meetings to share how they were transitioning. You had Tracy and our wellness coordinator at the time, Sarah Maxwell, sitting in on what we call IDWIG meetings, which is the infectious disease working group that exists in the area, and they draw resources from practitioners every week, and then the Marietta sitting in on community meetings and stuff. So the amount of time just spent in a community effort for the institution was really incredible to see too.
Yeah, and since we realized that our mission is to engage the community in learning, we knew we needed to involve them in everything we were doing. I'm going to give you the example of our food pantry. We know that we have kept this pantry as a USDA commodity site, so our senior administration was very concerned that we maintain it as long as we possibly could and work with them to keep it going because we knew more people would need food. So the pantry never closed. It just didn't allow people into it, but they set up distribution centers outside.
Out of the back of a van.
Out of the back of a van by
God
the
bless
bus
them.
stop for people who didn't have a car. And then they had a drive-through pantry distribution by our planetarium. So the
Yeah.
idea is, once again, what do people need? We had Tracy and I just met with the pantry director to work on some backpacks to give students, and so we had gotten this all done, everything packed, and then everything shut down. They voted the pantry decided, do you need this for someone? I said, well, Courage Connection, I was on the board at the time, I said, we just had to move people out of the houses into hotels. They said, give it to them. It's food they can warm up in the microwave. They said, at the distribution, give it to your students. If you have students coming to pick up laptops, give that to them. So it's a matter of we constantly find ways to support one another in the community, and that's one of the things I love about this area.
I almost forgotten too, one of the earliest images I have is the pictures Dr. Ramage took. So early on, none of us were on campus. He and Dean Ragsdale, who was Dean of Health Professions at the time, went through all of the health professions areas that first week we were out because the hospitals were getting overwhelmed and couldn't get PPE either. So they loaded up every ounce of PPE we could find in the institution, walking the halls and that kind of stuff, whether it be gloves or masks or gowns, those kinds of things that our students used in their clinical settings, which were now shutting down, and they loaded them all up in a bus, Parkland bus, and took them to the healthcare partners in the community to just help them bridge the gap as John Dwyer and IEMA and that were trying to get inbound PPE as fast as we could because nobody could keep enough of it at that point in time, and they hadn't tapped the Federal Reserve yet of that kind of material, which they eventually did a couple weeks later. But there was a period of time where they were starving for PPE too, and so I think they were very appreciative of Parkland, and I'm proud of that from a community standpoint.
That was one of those definite moments of pride.
Marketplace, the state government stood up Marketplace with the National Guard right early on. You know, they pretty quickly pivoted. They actually set up that site in Bloomington first, and then they splintered it off over here with the National Guard to get some testing over here in the Champaign area. But it became apparent, A, that the volume was too big. You know, Carl was setting up a drive-through test. OSF had some testing. But the community needs could not be met. No. And OSF, as we were talking about some pieces here, they said, Mike, if you're able to get us some resource and some ability, we'll help. And so we had bought a tent early on that we used with Walgreens to do some vaccines when the vaccines were first rolled out, that we could have an outdoor vaccine clinic. OSF then right away started testing in there too. So we had one day a week that was set up for vaccines. Then we quickly put testing out there too. So my assistant Holly, God bless her heart, I sent her on a mission and I'm like, I need you to buy a tent. And I think she looked at me like, you've given me crazy jobs before, but what do you want me to do? I'm like, I need the largest tent you can get your hands on. Because we knew we had a difficulty with the building and keeping it safe for the student environment. We didn't want to mix traffic and potentially create a situation where we negatively impact learning. So we're like, okay, what can we do instead? We're gonna, U of I has put some tents up. Why don't we go buy a tent? We'll drop it in the M5 or 6 parking lot, whatever that is out
Yep.
there, and we set up testing out there and vaccine clinics out there with the help of Walgreens and OSF. Eventually, Mother Nature was not kind to that tent, and it ripped it to shreds. I would go out there after every wind, and we'd tape together what
Try to
pieces
tape
of it
it.
we could tape together and pull the nylon cords back tight, and we milked it as long as it could, but it quickly gave out on us, and we had to move into D244. That's when we made the decision to go into that spot. But I think that tent was our first foray into it.
Was.
It
was the
served
spot.
its useful life before it went to the
Big
tent
up
heavens.
in the sky, yes. It hung tough, though.
It did for a long time. We had so much tape on that thing by the
Yeah.
end. Mother Nature that was not kind that summer. There's a couple bad thunderstorms that just played havoc with it. For me, it was the fortitude that everyone showed, I think, will have a lasting impact. I mean, the ability to pivot and move forward and onward and realize that we can overcome whatever challenge is thrown at us. I mean, in higher ed, challenges are constantly coming your way, necessitating change, whether it be new legislation that is forcing change or social or political climate that's forcing change. That's constantly at our doorsteps. And I think many of us by nature, myself included, are resistant to change at times. And this showed us that we could pretty much change with whatever the times were throwing at us. I think that's a positive we'll take away. I don't know. Let me think about that. You have anything that comes to mind immediate, Marietta?
I think for me, it showed the commitment to student success
Yeah.
that is at the heart of this institution. From the president's and vice president's office all the way down to every staff member, in every division. I have all of the work that I saw reinforced my belief that Parkland is one of the premier institutions in the country, because you don't find that. The top ones that get written about are the ones who are student-centered, and I believe this is one of the most student-centered institutions in the country. This is my third community college, and I always tell people I'm the best. But it's not just because I've been here a while, but it's because of what you see from people's energy towards what they'll do to support student academic success and success in life, because that's what it takes, is being there through the rough times. We spend a lot of time on student engagement and trying to help students grow as leaders and develop them. So we're working at this institution with the student inside and outside the classroom, and this pandemic showed that nothing can stop it. We had students who graduated during the pandemic who actually made
who
it.
never had a
stopped.
real, what we would have considered a normal Parkland experience. They started during the pandemic and finished
in
during
the
the pandemic.
That says it all to me.
Yeah.
I will remember that.
I think Marietta made me think of, I think another lasting impact of this pandemic time is a good push to the institution in terms of flexibility. So there was a buildup of infrastructure, specifically technological infrastructure, that will serve the institution well into the future. There was a buildup of institutional kind of knowledge flexibility and the ability for us to pivot and do some things that maybe we didn't think of before.
Right.
And so I think there is that was a lasting impact. That is a positive out of the pandemic. Not a lot of positives out of the pandemic, I think, but certainly the ones Marietta talked about, and that flexibility and adaptability.
I think the adaptability,
and
I think it kind of,
infrastructure.
it pushed us over the edge in terms of some of the technology, because it was like, okay, now what are you going to do? And the technology that was out there, we found out we could adapt to very quickly. People many times want to say, oh no, we can't do that, it's going to take a while. But if you're pushed into a corner, it's like the mother of invention. And I think that the pandemic was that for us in many instances,
Yeah,
especially
you're right.
with the
That necessity
technology.
really pushed us, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that, like you said, it's going to have a lasting, resonating effect going into the
Yeah.
future.